Silos are the bane of any development project. We divide up our work in order to stay efficient, but when we can keep each other in the loop and make decisions together, stronger products often come out of the other side. Our next speaker has been working to bring UX direction and game direction together, utilizing a concept from psychology called presence. Currently working as a UX director for Ubisoft, please welcome to the stage Ahmed Salama.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk today. The title of this talk is Presence in Practice. And I'm going to be talking a bit about the concept of presence from psychology and how you can use it in practice in your games. So I'm Ahmed. I'm currently a content director at Ubisoft HQ. I've been making interfaces for a bit over 18 years now. Started making desktop apps back in '05, moved into coding and designing for mobile in 2010 when the App Store was getting big. Then transitioned into games in 2013, where I started out as a programmer, moved into design on Horizon Zero Dawn, design and code, then onto Battlefield and Star Wars. And most recently, I've been at Ubisoft, so working as a content director, and before that, a UX director at Ubisoft Stockholm. So usually in our games, we start out with a game direction or a concept for a game, and then we come in and apply our vision to it, the UX vision, and fix some of the usability problems that reveal themselves. In this talk, I'm going to talk about a problem that I've been trying to solve for the past 5 years or so. It's how to get the UX team and the game design team to form a unified vision. So for that, we're going to use this concept, the concept of presence. And in psychology, presence, it's the psychological state or subjective perception in which part of or all your experience is generated by or filtered through technology. And what that means is that it's the effect you feel when you're receiving a stimulus from a remote agent, whether that's a recorded recording or a simulated one through technology. And this was a term coined by Marvin Minsky. He's the co-founder of the MIT lab, MIT AI lab, and he coined this in 1980. And there's a common misconception that this only applies to technologies like VR, but it actually applies to all technologies. And I can give you some examples so that you can better understand this concept. For instance, if you're on the phone, speaking to somebody on the phone, and you close your eyes, it would feel like you're in a room with somebody, talking to them, and that is a feeling of presence. Similarly, if you're controlling a drone or a rover, that feeling you get that you're present in a location, whether that a remote location, that is that feeling of presence. It was first coined around robotics, and an example is, for instance, if you have a robotic arm, like this toy grabber, if you have a lot of coins and a lot of time, eventually you will start feeling like this robotic arm is a extension of your own arm. And that's also the similar concept. Another way to think of it is if the human experience is, or the range of human experience is shown on this bar, and on one end you have a real experience, like if you're pinching yourself, you feel that's a real experience. And the other end you have a hallucination or a dream, something that you experience that is not real. Everything in the middle is what we would call a virtual experience. And that is what the field of presence studies. So there's a lot of psychologists that study this field, And I'm not an expert at it, but feel free to look up some white papers and read up on it yourself. It's super interesting and useful to our craft, which is game making. So we, of course, have a lot of remote agents in our games, like an avatar that you control. And in that sense, the feeling where the player is kind of present in that world is very relevant to us. So how can we use this in practice to make our games better? So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show some technologies that are in affinity with that feeling of presence and that contrast against it. So we can look at a couple of examples here. What I've done is I've just picked technologies that we all know and use in our games, some of which are or help that feeling of presence, and some of them contrast it. And you can see here things like ray tracing and adaptive triggers that were recently introduced on the PS5, but also things like good pacing of your game and inverse kinematics. These are all things that help give that player that feeling like they're present in that world. Whereas other things like clipping and foot sliding or things like difficulty spikes can pull the player out of that feeling of presence. There's a reason why I didn't say pro or con or good or bad. I use the words affinity and contrast because depending on what you do, you can use these intentionally. So none are good or bad, but some are for that feeling and some are against it. And of course, it's up to us to use those tools in our games. So when it comes to our user experience or our user interface, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to quickly summarize the types of UI we have or that we use in 3D games. And then we can talk about those with relation to that feeling of presence. I'm going to start by talking about this thesis. This is a thesis called Beyond the HUD. It was written here in Stockholm, where I am, at EA DICE back in 2009 by two students, Eric and Magnus. And what they did is they made a model which plots whether an interface is grounded in the narrative of the game against whether it's projected in the game world or not. And for those that have seen this already, I will just go through it for completion's sake so that we can use this and reason about how it affects your presence. So first off, you have diegetic interfaces. These were made famous by games like Dead Space. And here are some examples of diegetic interfaces. So on the top left here, you have Dead Space, where the ammo counter is actually projected in 3D space, so the player character can see it, and it's grounded in the narrative or in the story of the game. And an example here as well is Alien Isolation, where the character is actually holding a motion detector, which helps them see if the alien is nearby. Things like tachymeters or speed meters in racing games are also considered diegetic, and things like the ammo counter on your weapon in Halo. And so these are all interfaces that are in 3D space and grounded in the narrative of the games. Next, we can talk about meta interfaces. So these are ones that are two-dimensional, but are still based in the narrative. So you can see on the lower left here, an example from Call of Duty, where you see blood spatters on the screen, which is a 2D screen space effect, but is still supposed to convey what the character is seeing in the world. Of course, it doesn't really make sense. People don't see blood when they take damage, but it is a way to use an interface grounded in narrative in a way that is not projected in 3D space. Similarly, things like the G-lock effect that you see in Ace Combat, which you see when the pilot is pulling a lot of Gs. It kind of simulates the feeling of tunnel vision that pilots get when they're pulling a lot of Gs. This is also a 2D effect, but based in the narrative. Next up, we can look at spatial UIs or interfaces. Those are 3D or projected in 3D space, but are not based in the narrative. So here you can see things like the hearing screen effect that you see in The Last of Us. So it's supposed to represent what the player hears. And that is a 3D projection in the world, but is not based in the narrative, so you don't actually see sound waves. And then another example is a health bar that you see above an enemy that's projected in 3D, but not in the narrative. And then finally, we have abstract interfaces. Those are the ones we all know and love. These are just abstract interfaces, so they're not based in the narrative or in 3D space. They're just 2D interfaces, and a lot of games rely on these to explain game systems. So now that we've talked about these 4 types of UI that we use commonly in our games, let's have a look at how the feeling of presence that players have. So what I've done here is I've taken the liberty to sort the types of UI we have from top to bottom based on how much they are in affinity or at contrast with that feeling of presence. And then I've also taken, put as a rule of thumb which game loops they're best used for. So in the top, you have things that are diegetic, of course. So in the second-to-second gameplay of the game, things that the players need to react to in combat and in the core loops of the game. And as you slowly move back through meta, spatial, and abstract, it contrasts more and more with that feeling of presence. So in these loop times, that's just kind of a rule of thumb. Of course, it doesn't have to be in these loops, but it makes sense to have things that are very close to the core gameplay be diegetic or be in the world and in 3D space, whereas things that you see maybe every half hour, like a skill tree or something like that, more abstract. And again, none of these are better than the others. They are all tools in our toolbox, and interfaces can also appear in multiple of these buckets. So keep that in mind. So how can we use that to create a direction that is shared between a game design team and a UX team? So it can very easily be workshopped. And what we can do is we can take something like a feature map, which is something that is common in all productions, and hold a big workshop, get all the designers together in a room and start putting post-its up on the features and the sub-features to figure out which of these buckets they fit best in. And in the top right here, I kept that cheat sheet to kind of tie the loops to the types of UI. And this is something that can be done communally as a group and help bridge that gap that you often see between UX departments and game design departments, where the UX department is in service of the game design. Here you can workshop it together and make sure that you have a cohesive vision. What you can do when you've done a workshop like this is you can make a big artifact. So grab all the features that are diegetic, put them together in the bucket, and create an artifact like this. And that can help us to see what kind of types of information we want to show diegetically, what types of information we want to show in a meta interface, etc. So that helps us in figuring out what we need to ground in the narrative and how we do that. So this can be used to brief the narrative department to see whether they should create a device like the motion detector in Alien or something like that to help explain the information that you want to show in the narrative or in the story of the game. So another thing you can use this, another way you can use it is by when there are new features that get added, as we all add features in our games, you can look at the loop that it belongs to and reason about that and just add it in the right spot. So it's also a good way to look at your game holistically and directly understand what type of UI fits with your feature that you're designing. So if there is let's say an engagement designer or a monetization designer working on a feature that needs to get added, that the player only interacts with briefly, you already know which kind of style guide to look at, which is most likely going to be your abstract style guide. So next, I want to talk a bit about some case studies. So I've brought two here with me. One is a game we all know and love, Ghost of Tsushima, and we're going to look at that. And then another one that I've created for this talk. So Ghost of Tsushima, they did something really great. They had a feature called Guiding Wind, which we can analyze using this model and look at and see what they've done. So Ghost of Tsushima is an open world adventure game where you play a samurai that takes on the Mongol invasion of the island, Tsushima. So most of the time in open world adventure games, players navigate using things like location markers and compass markers on their HUDs. So here's an example from Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The main ways of navigating is with location markers that you see in your heads-up display and the compass. So that's how you track where you go to follow your quest line. And that looks something like this. You see a compass marker, which kind of lies in between the spatial and the abstract. And then you have spatial location markers that help you navigate to the point you're looking for. What they did very well, what Sucker Punch did very well for Ghost of Tsushima is they took, they made a feature called Guiding Wind, which is a diegetic feature, which shows the wind blowing in the direction that you have to go. And as you get closer to your objective, when you get within 50 meters, that's when they show the location marker. And I don't know if they actually use the model like this. This is just a way to study that game using this framework that we've talked about. They've probably done it instinctively, but it still looks very good if you analyze it this way. So here you can see the wind, all the foliage in the level, and even the horse's mane blows in the direction of the wind, showing you where you have to go. And they explain that in the narrative by it being your deceased father's spirit guiding you to your objective. As you get closer, that's when they show the traditional location marker. So this whole feature keeps you more present in the world. And it's a very good example of how you can use a model like this to improve your game. Next, what I've done is I've taken a fictional game that I've made for this presentation. let's call it Game Devs of Colorbot. It's a game where you play, or an adventure game where you play as this robot that you see here. And here I can show how we can take a feature map and actually go through the steps and apply this method to. So here you can see a simple feature map for an open world adventure game or a 3D adventure game. Usually games like this have health systems, low health warnings, things like shields or incoming threats for threats that attack you from off screen. Also features like skill trees and looting. These are all common features that you see in 3D games. So what you can do is, I've done this already for the sake of this presentation, but you can take the post-its like we said before and look at which features fall within the second-to-second loops and look at how often they appear in gameplay and tag them all. You can then take these features and spread them out over that artifact, similar to what I've shown before. And then, of course, take the top few buckets of features and try to put them in the narrative of the game to explain them or to help guide the narrative. And what I've done here is I've made a couple of renders to show what that could look like. So here's our game. You play as this robot, and the first feature we're going to look at is the health system. What I've done here is I've taken the capacitors on the robot's back and made them the health buckets. You see them in green over there. So similar to the example we showed before, like Dead Space. And then taken the feature of the shield and applied that to the shields on the body of the robot. So these can get damaged or fall off or reduce in glow if you get hit until your shields go down. Next up, an incoming threat indicator. This is something that's commonly used in games like this because you can get attacked from off screen. So what we've done here is showed it as a signal that is visible on one of the antennas, the robot's antennas. So these can be all the diegetic interfaces that we have for this game. Next up, a meta interface. So this is similar to Call of Duty. We take a screen space effect that might represent something that the robot sees or glitching that the robot sees. And we use that as the low health warning. So this is something you maybe see every other encounter or every encounter where you do bad. You don't see it every second of gameplay, but you see it less often. Next, we take something like loot, which is also more that you see every encounter or so. And we can use a spatial interface for that. So actually show it contextually on the item that you can loot in the world. And then finally, we can take something like a skill tree, which is something that you'll probably see every time you level up. So maybe every 20 or 30 minutes or so, and then have that as an abstract interface. So that's how we can take a game like this and workshop it and figure out how we make decisions around the interface. What we can also do is we can do some quantifying or measuring. So this we can do with playtests or with telemetry. So we can take the interfaces we have and track how often they appear and how long they appear for, and then kind of sum up the time they're visible and make maybe a mean judgment where we see on average we are now mostly diegetic or another type of UI, and we can use this to then later look at the data and see if we were successful or if there are anomalies. So this can be done either with telemetry or um, even with a stopwatch and a recording of a playtest. We can then use this to also validate our assumptions. And again, none of these are right or wrong. Some are better than are better than others. Some UI types are better than others for specific situations, but they're all tools in our toolbox that we can use. So yeah, that's it for my talk. I hope this can be useful to you in your project and useful to you in finding consensus between game design departments and UXers. We're all in it together, and I hope this helps you create a unified vision. So thank you for listening, and I will be around here to answer any questions for you. Thank you very much.
There's so much precision of language in Ahmed's talk. Presence, affinity, contrast. Coming up with a shared language creates a reliable framework for a team to be able to come back to when they're creating. And I can see how setting these UI and UX frames can result in a more efficient team communication strategy and smoother development, which makes a better game. I honestly think there are ways to apply these concepts even outside of the game space. Thank you for your talk, Ahmed.